I had just signed a $10 million software contract when my sister shoved me down my parents' staircase. 4 days later, I woke in the ICU with a brain injury, a fractured ankle, and no family beside me. When my parents finally came, Dad didn't ask if I was okay. He said, "Marissa made a mistake." "Don't ruin her life," Mom added. "You pushed her too far." Weeks later, I walked into court on crutches while my family sat behind my sister. Then Dad saw the man standing beside my attorney. His face went white. "Oh my God." "Theo." Because Theo wasn't there to support me. He was there to repeat the 6 words my sister said before my parents rewrote everything. "My name is Elena Foster. I'm 31. And Northline Clinical Systems had been my life for 5 years before that contract ever existed. We weren't a unicorn. We weren't famous. We were a 24-person healthcare software company in Denver that had spent years selling smaller tools to regional hospital systems and trying to prove we could handle something bigger. The deal that finally changed everything was a 4-year licensing and deployment agreement worth up to $10 million. That didn't mean $10 million landed in my bank account. The money would come through implementation milestones, software licensing, support, and rollout across multiple hospitals. Still, it was the largest contract Northline had ever signed, and Marissa had helped us win it. My sister was 35 and worked as Northline's Director of Client Partnerships. She was good at her job. She knew how to read a room, keep executives engaged, and push a stalled meeting back onto the calendar without making anyone feel pressured. She had made the original introduction that eventually led to the hospital group behind the contract. That mattered. What also mattered was everything that came before it. I had founded Northline. I had built the first version of the software, hired the engineering team, raised the early money, sat through every technical review, and spent 5 years carrying the risk of a company that could have failed at any point. For the first 2 years, I paid myself less than some of my employees because keeping payroll and software development funded mattered more than looking successful. Marissa joined 2 years earlier, partly because she was qualified, partly because my parents had been saying the same thing for years. "You're smart, Elena," Dad would say, "but Marissa knows how to talk to people." Mom had a version too. "You need your sister in the room. She makes people comfortable." They never said I wasn't talented, they just had a way of making my talent sound incomplete without her. I thought hiring Marissa might finally end that comparison. Instead, success made it worse. She already had a strong salary, employee stock options, and the board had approved a major performance bonus plus a promotion once the rollout began. I thought she would be proud. That evening, I drove to my parents' house with a bottle of champagne and a printed copy of the signed agreement. Theo, Marissa's fiancé, was already there. I held up the contract and smiled. It closed. Everyone cheered. Marissa hugged me. Then she stepped back and asked one question. "So what does this make me?" At first, I thought Marissa was joking. "What do you mean?" She set down her champagne. "What does this deal make me?" I smiled carefully. "It makes you the person who helped land the biggest client we've ever had." Her expression didn't move. "The board approved your bonus, and once implementation starts, you're moving up to VP of Client Partnerships." Dad lifted his glass. "See, that's wonderful." Marissa looked at me. "That's it." The room changed. I felt it immediately. "What were you expecting?" She laughed once. "I brought them to you. Elena, you made the introduction. I got us in the room. And 24 people spent 14 months getting us through due diligence, security reviews, legal review, and implementation planning." Her jaw tightened. "You still think I'm just an employee. You are an executive employee." Mom winced like I'd insulted her. I continued. "You're well paid, you have stock options, you're getting a major bonus and a promotion." Marissa leaned forward. "But I'm not an owner. You're not a founder." Dad set his glass down harder than necessary. $10 million and you still have to keep score. This isn't $10 million in my checking account." "Dad, it's a 4-year corporate contract." Mom shook her head. "Would it kill you to give your sister more credit? I am giving her credit." "No," Marissa said. "You're giving me a title. What do you want?" She hesitated just long enough for me to understand she had thought about this before tonight. 10%. I stared at her. Of North Line. You wouldn't have this deal without me. I might not have this deal without you. For a second. She looked surprised. Then I added, but that doesn't mean you own 10% of a company I spent 5 years building. Her face hardened. You always do this. Do what? Make sure everyone remembers you're the genius and I'm the help. Theo finally spoke from across the room. Marissa, maybe this isn't the night. She ignored him. I stood. I'm not discussing the cap table at Mom's dining table. I went upstairs for my coat and purse. Marissa followed. Elena, I'm leaving. Tell me you would have gotten that contract without me. I already told you I don't know. Then admit I made it happen. You helped make it happen. She grabbed my arm. I looked at her hand. Let go. She didn't. I pulled back. Her face twisted. Then she shoved me. The staircase disappeared beneath my feet. The last thing I remember was Theo shouting my name. What I didn't hear was what Marissa said seconds later, while I lay unconscious below them. Theo did, and for weeks. He told no one. I woke up 4 days later in the ICU. At first, I didn't know where I was. There was a monitor beside me, a pressure band around my arm, and a heavy ache behind my eyes that made even opening them feel like work. My right ankle was immobilized. 2 ribs were cracked. Doctors told me I had suffered a traumatic brain injury and a small intracranial bleed they had been monitoring closely. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Where are my parents? The nurse hesitated. They were here after you were admitted. Are they coming back? I don't know. That answer hurt more than I expected. My company's outside counsel visited later that afternoon. He kept it simple. Northline is operating. The contract is intact. The board activated the continuity plan. You need to recover. For the first time since waking up, I could breathe. Nobody had stolen the company. Nobody had taken the deal. The thing I couldn't trust was my own memory. A detective came the next morning. I remembered arguing with Marissa. I remembered her following me upstairs. I remembered her hand around my arm. I remembered saying, "Let go." After that, everything broke apart. I remember being pulled backward, I said carefully, or pushed. I remember force. Do you remember the first step? No. Do you remember seeing her hands move? No. I hated every answer. But I refused to invent certainty just because I wanted it. That evening, my parents finally came. Mom stood near the door. Dad stayed at the foot of my bed. Neither of them hugged me. Dad spoke first. Your sister made a terrible mistake. I stared at him. She pushed me. Mom immediately shook her head. You don't actually remember that. I remember her grabbing me. You were both angry, she said. Things got out of control. Dad leaned closer. The detective talked to us. You already told him your memory is incomplete. Yes. Then tell him it could have been an accident. I looked at him. That isn't the same thing. Elena. Not remembering every second isn't the same as remembering an accident. Mom's mouth tightened. You humiliated Marissa in front of everyone. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad sighed. I'm not saying she should have touched you, but you brought this confrontation on yourself. There it was. 4 days unconscious, a brain injury, a fractured ankle, and somehow, their biggest fear was still what might happen to Marissa. As they turned to leave, Dad said quietly, Don't ruin your sister's life over 5 seconds. I looked down at the brace around my leg. 5 seconds had already changed mine. I was discharged 6 days later with crutches, a walking boot, a stack of follow-up appointments, and strict instructions not to pretend recovery meant I was fine. Samira picked me up. She had been my closest friend since college, and unlike my family, she didn't ask me to explain what happened before helping me get home. At Northline, the board placed Marissa on administrative leave while outside employment counsel reviewed the incident. I stayed out of that decision. I was her sister, her CEO, and the person who had ended up unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. Any one of those was a conflict. All 3 meant I had no business deciding her employment status myself. For the first few days, Marissa stayed quiet, then the texts started. You don't remember what happened. Stop telling people I pushed you. I didn't respond. An hour later, you're going to destroy everything over something you can't even remember clearly. I saved both messages and forwarded them to my attorney. 3 days later, she came to my building. I knew because the front desk called upstairs. Ms. Foster. There's a woman here asking to see you. She says she's your sister. My stomach tightened. Then my phone buzzed. Come downstairs. We need to fix this before lawyers ruin everything. I told the desk I was not accepting visitors. Marissa waited outside for almost 20 minutes. She never forced her way in. She never threatened me directly. But I was standing in my apartment on crutches, still waking with headaches, watching the lobby camera while the person I believed had pushed me waited downstairs for me to come out. That was enough. The next morning, my attorney explained my options. A protection order is about safety and contact, she said. It is not a criminal conviction. That distinction mattered to me. I wasn't asking a judge to decide every detail of the staircase. I was asking for space to recover without Marissa showing up at my home. We filed using the police report, my medical records, her messages, and the building record showing she had come after I told her not to contact me. The temporary order was granted. A hearing would follow. Once Marissa was served, she stopped contacting me. My parents did not. Dad called first. A court order against your own sister. Yes. Her wedding is in 5 months. I looked at the physical therapy schedule on my refrigerator, and my ankle is broken now. Mom called later. She made one mistake. I said nothing. Then my attorney called. Her voice had changed. Someone who was in the house that night contacted me. I sat up. She paused. He says he should have spoken sooner. I already knew the answer before she said his name. Theo. Theo met with my attorney 2 days later. I joined by video because my doctor still didn't want me spending long stretches in cars or conference rooms. The first thing Theo said was not what I expected. I didn't see Marissa push you. For a second, my stomach dropped. Then he continued. I was downstairs, I heard you say. Let go. Then I heard the crash. He rubbed both hands over his face when I got to the stairs. You were already at the bottom. Marissa was standing near the top. My attorney asked. What happened next? Theo looked directly at the camera. She said, I only pushed her because she wouldn't stop. The room went completely still. I felt my pulse in my ankle. You heard her say that, yes. Before my parents came over, yes. My attorney leaned forward. Did you tell police? Theo looked ashamed. No. Why not? Because I was engaged to her. He didn't dress it up. He didn't claim confusion or panic erased his judgment. I told myself I hadn't seen the actual shove, so I shouldn't repeat something she said while she was terrified. Then Helen started saying Elena slipped. Robert agreed, and I let myself believe staying quiet was different from lying. It wasn't. I said, I know. That answer mattered more than an excuse would have. Then Theo opened his phone. After the accident, Marissa had texted him repeatedly. One message said, Please don't repeat what I said by the stairs. I was in shock. Another. You know I barely touched her. She was already backing away. And later. If you love me, you won't destroy my life over 5 seconds. None of them said. I deliberately pushed Elena down the stairs. They didn't need to. They confirmed physical contact. They confirmed Marissa remembered what she had said afterward, and they confirmed she wanted Theo to keep it quiet. My attorney asked permission to preserve the full message thread. Theo agreed. He had already scheduled a supplemental interview with the detective. Then he said something else. The wedding is off. I didn't know what to say. He gave a tired laugh. I kept thinking about marrying someone who needed me to hide what happened while her sister was unconscious. I looked at him. You should have spoken sooner. Yes, but you're speaking now. He nodded. That was all the forgiveness I had. Over the next week, Theo gave his statement, turned over the messages, and agreed to testify at the protection order hearing. My parents knew the hearing was coming. They knew Marissa had a lawyer. They knew I planned to appear. What they did not know was that Theo would be walking into that courtroom with my side, and neither did Marissa. The hearing was 4 weeks after the fall. I still needed one crutch for longer distances, and the courthouse stairs had become something I refused to look at directly. Every step reminded me how quickly 5 seconds could divide a life into before and after. Samira came with me. My attorney met us outside the courtroom, across the hall. My family was already there. Mom, Dad, Marissa, an aunt, 2 cousins. They had arranged themselves around my sister like a wall. Dad spotted me first. "You're really doing this." I looked at the brace around my ankle. "Yes." My aunt shook her head. "You're walking. Isn't that what matters?" Before I could answer. Footsteps sounded behind me. Dad looked past my shoulder. His face changed. "Oh my God!" Marissa went completely still. Theo didn't look at her. He walked directly to my attorney. That was the moment my family understood the hearing was not going the way they had expected. Inside, the judge kept things simple. This was not a criminal trial. The question was whether the temporary protection order should continue. I testified first. I described the argument, Marissa grabbing my arm, the blank space in my memory, her messages afterward, and her appearance at my building. I did not say I remembered seeing her push me, because I didn't. Then Theo took the stand. Marissa's attorney asked him immediately, "Did you actually see my client push her sister no for half a second?" Mom exhaled. Theo continued, "But I heard Elena say, 'Let go.' I heard the fall, and when I reached the staircase, Marissa said, 'I only pushed her because she wouldn't stop.'" Nobody moved. My attorney introduced the messages. "Please don't repeat what I said by the stairs. You know I barely touched her." Theo admitted he should have told police immediately. "Why didn't you?" the judge asked. "Because I was engaged to her. And I was a coward. No speech, no excuse, just the truth." Marissa's lawyer argued that one terrible family argument did not make her an ongoing threat. My attorney pointed to the later texts and the visit to my apartment after I had refused contact. The judge took a short recess. When she returned, she continued the protection order. No applause, no handcuffs, no dramatic sentence. Just a legal boundary my family had refused to respect on their own. In the hallway afterward, Dad dropped into a bench. Mom was crying. Marissa stared at Theo like she no longer recognized him. Dad looked at me and whispered, "You brought him here." I shook my head. "No." Then I looked at my sister. "He came because you asked him to lie." The criminal investigation continued after the protection order hearing. I stayed out of the details as much as I could. Theo gave his statement. The detectives had the messages. What happened next belonged to prosecutors, not to me. Northline's board finished its own review separately. Marissa's employment ended. The $10 million contract stayed intact, although the first deployment moved back a few weeks while I recovered. I returned to work slowly, half days from home, then 3 days a week, physical therapy twice a week, neurology appointments, for months. Stairs still made my chest tighten before my brain caught up and reminded me where I was. My parents tried one more time. Dad said, "We were trying to save both our daughters." I looked at him. "Only one of your daughters was unconscious." Mom started crying. "Marissa made one terrible mistake. The shove was one moment," I said. "What you did after I fell was a choice you kept making." Neither of them had an answer for that. I stopped waiting for one. 6 months after the fall, Northline completed the first major hospital rollout under the contract. I stood at the back of a conference room while my team presented results I had once been afraid I would never live to see. Theo wasn't there. He wasn't my friend, my rescuer, or some new chapter in my life. He was simply the person who had failed to tell the truth once and eventually decided not to fail twice. For years, my parents had called me strong whenever they needed me to accept less. Now I understood strength differently. They left me alone when I couldn't stand. By the time I walked into court, I had finally learned who was willing to stand beside me. If your family asked you to stay quiet to protect the person who hurt you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more family betrayal stories where boundaries finally have consequences.